Linguistic determinism is the concept that our language shapes our perception of reality. If you don't have a word for it, it doesn't exist. For example, the ancient Greeks did not have a word for the color blue. Therefore, they might not have perceived it as distinctly as modern speakers see it. This hypothesis is based on the observations that in ancient Greek texts, the color blue is not mentioned. For instance, in Homer's The Odyssey, the sea is described as wine dark rather than blue. This example supports the notion of linguistic determinism by suggesting that the absence of a word for blue in Greek could have influenced the Greeks' perception and categorization of a real-world object, such as sea. Without a distinct term for blue, they lumped it together with other neighboring shades like green or gray. The same happens in other domains, like politics, for example. Let's discuss two countries that have a complex historic relationship. First, let's start with a bit of European history. In the 9th century AD, a powerful ruler established an empire that covers vast regions of what we know as two different countries now. This empire was a cornerstone for both nations, laying the groundwork for centuries of shared heritage. Moving on to cultural and linguistic similarities, these two countries share a long border, and the regions along this border exhibit a mix of cultural influences. Both languages are spoken in these areas, which is natural given the deep cultural exchange over centuries. In the 20th century, both countries became a part of the same political union, which shaped their similar political system and outlooks. In fact, if you were to take a DNA test by the largest commercial DNA test provider, 23andMe, the genetic heritage of these two countries is undistinguishable. So, someone not familiar with the local context, from a different continent, for example, might even perceive these two countries as the same country. Which two countries am I talking about? Chances are that you thought of Ukraine and Russia, but actually I was describing France and Germany. They both belong to the EU, they have deep historical ties, both being founded by the Frankish Emperor Charlemagne. German and French are spoken in the border regions Alsace and Lorraine. They are lumped together into a common gene pool by the genetic firm 23andMe, and continuous cultural exchanges make them seem like a part of the single cultural region, especially from an outsider's perspective. But certainly the French and the Germans will be surprised by this point of view. So are you, dear listeners, because you have been familiar with the words France and Germany since you were a baby and you take it for granted. And what about the word Frankish? I've just mentioned the Emperor Charlemagne or Karl the Great. In fact, he was so great that the Slavic word for king is korol, which is a variation of his name Karl. Now, let's delve a bit deeper into the historical terminology and why certain words can be misleading when talking about the early Middle Ages. Some words might sound similar, but have a very different meaning. You might have heard the term Frankish and French used interchangeably at times, but it's not correct. For example, when the Vikings sieged Paris, the city was not populated by the French, but by the Franks. It's important to understand the distinction. The Franks were a Germanic tribe that played a crucial role in the European history during the early Middle Ages. When we talk about the Frankish emperor, we are referring to the realm ruled by Charlemagne and his predecessors, which included large parts of both modern-day France and Germany, including Belgium and the Netherlands. The term Frankish derives from the Franks, and it is appropriate when discussing the Middle Ages. This was a period before the distinct national identity of France and Germany emerged. Charlemagne's empire was a multi-ethnic conglomerate that cannot be accurately described as French-German. On the other hand, French refers to the people and culture and language that developed in the region we now call France. This identity started to form much later, well after the times of Charlemagne. Using French to describe events in Middle Ages can be misleading because it implies a national identity that did not exist yet. This distinction matters because the history of the Frankish Empire is a shared heritage for both France and Germany. For example, if we refer to Charlemagne as a French king, we overlook his role as a unifier of various tribes and territories that extended far beyond modern France. His influence was felt across a wide area of Central Europe. When we hear the term Roman, we often think of the mighty Roman Empire, which spanned much of Europe, North Africa, and parts of Middle East. The Romans left a permanent mark on the world history with their innovations in law, architecture, and governance. The Roman Empire is long gone, but the etymology of the word is still alive. The term Romanian relates to the people and culture of modern-day Romania. The connection between Roman and Romanian is complex and rooted in the region's historical desire to link itself to the grandeur of the Roman Empire. The territory that is now Romania was once home to the ancient tribe Dacians. In 106 AD, the Roman Emperor Trajan conquered Dacia, integrating it into the Roman Empire. This conquest and subsequent Romanization left a lasting impact on the region in terms of language and culture. The Latin language introduced by the Romans evolved into Romanian, and it is the only Latin language in Eastern Europe. In the formation of national identities, many countries seek to emphasize ancient roots to bolster national pride and legitimacy. The Romanian national narrative often highlights the Roman conquest of Dacia and the Latin origin of the Romanian language to draw a direct line to the esteemed Roman Empire. Claiming a connection to an ancient and powerful civilization enhances national prestige. It provides a sense of continuity and historic legitimacy, suggesting that the nation has deep and strong roots. Highlighting a glorious past fosters a sense of pride among citizens. It reinforces a shared cultural heritage that can unify people and strengthen national identity. Nations often portray themselves as the heir to great civilizations to emphasize their long-standing contribution to human history and culture. Romania's emphasis on its Roman heritage is evident in its very name, which derives from Romanus, meaning citizen of Rome, which is totally fine. But now imagine that Romania claims that Italy is an artificial state and has never existed. Outrageous. But this is exactly what Putin does. The story of Tsardom of Moscow and the birth of Russia is a tale of strategic appropriation and historical narrative building. In the 13th century, the Mongol invasion devastated the region, and various principalities fell under the control of the Golden Horde. Under Mongol rule, the Principality of Moscow began to rise to prominence. Over the next few centuries, Moscow's rulers managed to expand their territory through military conquest and alliances, which ended up with annexations. By the late 15th century, Ivan III had significantly expanded the principality's power and territory, and adopted the Byzantine double-headed eagle as a symbol. This was an attempt to legitimize Moscow's claim to imperial legacy. In 1547, his grandson, Ivan the Terrible was crowned as Tsar of all Rus, claiming territories outside his realm. The term Tsar, derived from Caesar, was meant to position Moscow as the rightful successor to the Roman and Byzantine empires. Then, after the fall of Constantinople, Moscow proclaimed itself the Third Rome. Claiming heritage to the Roman Empire doesn't really work if you live in Siberia. So, the most significant and unfortunately successful step in Moscow's fake narrative building was its appropriation of the heritage of Kievan Rus. This was a strategic move to enhance its legitimacy and historical depth. They adopted the name Russia, which is Greek for Rus, instead of Muscovy. The name itself is a propaganda directly invoking the heritage of Rus, and the rest of the world accepted it. What's the big deal, you might think? Rus refers to a group of territories and people from the early medieval period, primarily centered around Kiev, the capital of modern-day Ukraine. The state known as Kievan Rus was established by the North traders and warriors who settled and integrated with the local Slavic population. This state was a crucial cultural and political entity in the Eastern Europe from the 9th to the 13th century. Rus is considered a foundational state for several modern Eastern European nations, including Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Its capital, Kiev, was a major center of culture, trade, and religion, particularly following the adoption of Christianity in the late 10th century. Fast forward to the late medieval period, and we see an emergence of a Muscovy identity around Moscow. This identity was significantly influenced by the Mongol invasion and the subsequent dominance of the Golden Horde over the region which became Russia. It profoundly impacted the political, social, and economic structure of what you call Russia. The Muscovites adopted administrative practices and military strategies from their Mongol overlords, which helped them to consolidate power and expand their territories in a way the Mongols did. The way the society in Russia is organized today still reflects it. On the other hand, Rus was geographically centered in what is now Ukraine. Kiev, the heart of Kievan Rus, is the key cultural and historic landmark for Ukrainians. The legacy of Kievan Rus is deeply embedded in the Ukrainian national identity. The law, language, and religion of the Rus continued in Western Ukraine and in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania despite the Mongol invasion. The Ukrainian national project, like practically all European nations, was born in the 19th century when it became clear that the age of empires was coming to an end. Nations don't inherently need names. People know who they are, and usually creates the names for their neighbors, for other nations. A good example would be Germany. In German, it is known as Deutschland, but in English, it's Germany. In French and Spanish and other Latin-based languages, it is Allemagne or Alemania. And in Ukrainian and some other Slavic languages, it is Niemczechina. Just like the Italians, Ukrainians adopted a name that refers to a broader geographical region, and the Ukraine became Ukraine. It reflects where we live, but ultimately, it's just a name. Its primary function is to distinguish ourselves from our neighbors in relations to third countries. Between you and your neighbor, you instinctively know who is who. You only need to explain it to the outsiders. Using Russian to describe the period of Rus and the region before the Russian Empire conquered Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states in the 18th century is misleading for several reasons. Just as with Roman and Romanian, or Frankish and French, using these terms accurately helps us understand European history. Unfortunately, the limitations of the English language often lead to the replacement of Rus with Russia, especially in popular literature and cinema. This mistake and general ignorance contribute to the appropriation of the history of Ukraine by the world's worst amateur historian and Russia's dictator, Putin. It allows for the misleading narrative that modern Russia is the direct and sole heir to Kievan Rus, overlooking the distinct historical development of the countries in the region. In conclusion, let me clarify my main point. I am not claiming that Ukraine is the sole heir to Kievan Rus. My argument is quite different. We cannot justify modern geopolitical decisions based on ancient history. What happened thousands of years ago is largely irrelevant to today's world. In fact, modern humanitarian law was established after World War II, and in 1975, European countries agreed in Helsinki that borders in Europe are immutable. Modern international law matters more than history or religion. My central message is this: don't be deceived by Russia's attempt to appropriate the medieval history of Eastern Europe. They want you to believe that Russia is eternal and that Ukraine is a transient entity, making it acceptable if Ukraine ceases to exist in the future. Don't fall for this narrative. Regarding the limitation of the English language in capturing historic nuances, the Encyclopedia Britannica provides useful terminology. Ruthenian with th or Rusin with y should be used to refer to the period from the 9th to the 14th century of the principalities collectively known as Kievan Rus. The Latin term Ruthenus or plural Rutheni is equivalent to the Slavic Rusin or plural Rusine, both meaning an inhabitant of the land of Rus. These words are as different from the word Russian as Romanian is different from Roman, or Frankish is not the same as French. If only American President Woodrow Wilson had known this in 1919, European history would have taken a different path. But it's a story for another time. Thank you for your attention. Keep helping Ukraine. Your donation matters. Stay tuned if you are interested in my podcast, and please share, like, subscribe. Bye.